We have Roland, is it Spies? Spies. Roland
Spies, let's
you're
welcome
up.
Roland.
I want to say that I'm here tonight to see a friend of mine who is one of the storytellers yet to come, and he assured me that it's a generous audience. So this is a tale of teenage boys, poor judgment, and a deceptively fast car. That's a combination that can be awfully dangerous and perhaps end badly, but I'm standing before you here tonight as evidence that it did not in this case. This story took place in, as I recall, the summer of 1977, when I was turning 17 years old. In fact, it was the very summer when I met my friend tonight, Todd Weinberger, who is one of our storytellers. It was an eventful and important summer for me in a lot of ways, but this story was not one of the important things that happened. It's one of the things that could have derailed everything else, but fortunately did not. So a note about the teenage boys: it was me and three of my best friends, two of whom are still some of my best friends to this day. We are now, as you can see, old men, and we still enjoy each other's company. We met as kindergartners, and we still love each other like brothers. The poor judgment, I think, is just manifest. We were teenagers, and so that's kind of part of the deal. A note about the car, I think, would be helpful, and it necessitates a footnote about my father. When I was 15 years old, not quite 16, my dad, who was just 39 at the time, passed away from a brain tumor. He was the chief of police of my hometown in rural southern Illinois. He was not a man of much formal education, but he was creative and ambitious in his own way. And that showed up in a lot of different ways, and particularly about the way he went about his job as a law enforcement officer on a small town police force without a lot of resources. So one of the ways he tried to amplify, I guess you might say, those resources was they had one police cruiser in the town, which he and the two other officers, of course, had to share whenever they were doing their shifts. But he thought, wouldn't it be a great idea if we had another vehicle that we could use occasionally for police work? So this was one of the things that he used as a persuasive tool with my mother to buy a car which to most sort of outward appearances was an ordinary family car, but it was not. It was a 1974 Dodge Coronet Custom, which was a police special version, which he found for sale at a car lot in a town about 15 miles away and fell deeply and lustfully in love with. And in his mind, he justified buying this car because it could effectively become, for him, a second police car for my hometown. And that was the angle that he used with my mom to get her to sort of green light that purchase for our family. Some of you may have heard of the term muscle car. These were things that arose, in kind of a testosterone-fueled thing in the late 1960s. Pontiac GTOs and Chevelle Super Sports, Ford Mustang Mach 1s, and a whole range of Chrysler products of one kind or another, Plymouth Barracudas and Dodge Chargers. Well, one of those things that was sort of a secret muscle car was a Dodge Coronet Custom. because under the hood, it was a beast. But on the outside, it just looked like a regular old sedan. And so my dad got this car. And as a part of his effort to turn it into kind of this police car, he went before the police board, which was a subset of the city council in my hometown, and he successfully got them to approve some customization of the vehicle. This included the installation of a siren, which was actually literally underneath the hood of the car and could be turned on with a switch inside the car, a set of flashing red lights, which were installed inside the grille of the car, and which, you know, generally, if the car was just driving around town, you would not notice these lights at all. But again, when the switch was flipped on the inside of the car, they would flash and, you know, obviously make it look something like a police car. And so this was, in the months leading up to me getting my driver's license, this was our family vehicle. And as I said, in a moment of, you know, sadness, shortly before I got my license, my father passed away. And that was in March of that year. And in July, just a few months later, I got my driver's license. And this is where the poor judgment part of the story begins. And so I would occasionally get to drive this car, you know, seeking and occasionally receiving permission from my mother to drive it for various events, you know, occasionally to school or for some after-school activity, that sort of thing. Well, one weekend, I just got kind of general permission to drive the car with some friends of mine. I think we made up some excuse about, you know, visiting a friend who needed some assistance, which was amorphous. And so the end result was 4 of us piled into the Coronet Custom, and off we went for an evening of unspecified fun and assistance for the friend, which I'm not sure really existed. And so we lived in a rural area of southern Illinois where the towns were small. The town that I grew up in had maybe 2,500 people, and it was completely surrounded by corn and bean fields and miles of open country in between it and the next towns in any given direction. And growing up, we learned our way around a lot of this open country. The back country roads, you know, a lot of it was just kind of out in the open, but there were certain spots that we loved and we got to know that were back in the woods. The twistier roads that went over creeks and wound through woodlots and so forth. Those are the places that we loved to haunt when we had the opportunity. So on the particular night in question, I was driving around with 3 of my friends, no particular aim in mind. And we were not, at least at the moment, otherwise misbehaving, just driving around. And as we were driving down one of these particular twisty roads through a set of dark woods, overhanging trees, over the asphalt roadway with no road markings on it, anything like that, a typical country road in a lot of ways. We came around a bend and we saw parked ahead of us, maybe a couple of 100 yards, a car on the side of the road. It was a VW Bug, and we could immediately tell that there were people in the car. The lights on the car were turned off, but we saw lights inside the car. And so I was not going fast yet. And so I pretty quickly came to kind of a crawl going down the road. And I had my headlights on, so obviously this car, as soon as I made the bend, saw me approaching behind them. And my buddies, you know, as buddies so commonly are, were great eggers on of any kind of, you know, attempt of going off the rails, which I was about to do. And so we're slowing down and approaching this car. And as we're getting closer and our headlights are beginning to shine up onto the car, I can see that there are other teenage boys in this car. And if they're sitting on the side of the road in the woods with their lights off, chances are pretty good that they're up to something that's no good. And so as we're going up behind them, I sort of look at my friends and I say, I got an idea. And so we were maybe 50 yards or so behind the car at this point and still approaching in kind of a slow crawl. And at that moment, I flipped at the same time both of the switches in the car, which activated the siren and the lights in the grill. And I didn't immediately hit the gas. I just turned those on just to kind of see what would happen. And what happened was the VW took off almost immediately like a rocket. So I was correct. Something was going on in that car that they did not want to have known. And I was, in a sense, shocked that their immediate reaction was to run away from what seemed like a police car rather than to just pull over and stop. And so something in that moment made me react. And rather than just laughing and saying, ha, look at those kids running, I punched the gas on that Coronet Custom and began to follow them at a high rate of speed on these twisty country roads, going through the woods, sort of sliding around corners. And I was proud of myself because I didn't have much experience driving yet at that point. But I successfully kept the car on the road for at least, I would say, maybe 2 miles. And because we started at a slower rate of speed, maybe 3 minutes, something like that, that I was following behind these other guys. And the best thing that I remember visually from that episode was a young man who was staring out the back window, the small back window of this VW Bug, with his eyes very large, looking at probably all he could see was the headlights and the flashing red lights of my car, and telling his buddies, go, 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 go. And they went, and after the brief chase, I felt like, okay, I've acted in enough poor judgment for this evening. And so I gradually slowed down and let them get away. And so the two things that I took away from that, and that I imagine, and that kind of warmed me to this day, is that my 3 friends who were with me in the car still occasionally tell the story about, remember the time when we chased those guys in the woods, how much fun that was. And then I always also think of the young men in the VW who are also telling the story, remember that time we ran away from the cop and got away successfully out in the woods. So that was the story of what happened that night for me.